right. You let that
Guys, come on, it was the plan.
That was the plan. Well, there you go. Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome.
Good evening.
Another episode of IFWAS. How is everyone doing?
Good.
I'm good.
Legit. Raspurrtin, good to see you. Giggler, he's back. That's fun. Multi will be here shortly.
We let him back after last time.
Oh yeah, he cleared himself, so he's good now.
So I may have mentioned that
What did you mention?
2021, my theme was Year of Sobriety. And Thursday last week, I had a bit of a, let's call it a slip.
Thursday last week.
I have a vague recollection of being on the show last week. I tried to watch it and then I stopped knowing I didn't want to know what happened. So you guys know what happened. If I'm still here, that's cool. Thank you.
I mean, I don't recall. Justin, do you recall?
What? Thursday?
Giggler realized that he's privileged. That was one
thing.
No.
Yeah, Giggler was like, it was
like everyone hates me, and
it was like white fragility on full display, is what it was.
There it is.
Eugenics was in there somehow, and
you were going through it that night.
Yeah. Don't worry, he brushed it off in an hour and slept very good. So,
well, I did sleep very good.
Oh, see,
there you go.
No harm, no foul then. So, I mean, you're in the clear, so that's fine.
We all good? Okay, we're all good.
We're all good. Yeah.
I apologize for my wretched behavior, and I'm back to my year of sobriety.
Oh, okay. Yeah, restart, redo.
Just restart.
There you go.
Just have one of those workplace day calendars. Like, how many days until sobriety? Well, we're back to 0.
This, as I understand it, is the advantage of having a theme like year of sobriety versus having a New Year's resolution like I'm not going to drink this year. Because if I had a New Year's resolution, I'm not going to drink this year, and then last Thursday happened, I'm like, fuck it, wait until next year. But having that theme, year of sobriety, okay, that happened, and I can still continue my theme of trying to drink less this year. So yeah, it's all good. Mm-hmm. We'll move forward.
I mean, you're working on it.
Yeah, there's this podcast about like how to be happier and blah blah blah, and there's one of the things is like pick a theme for the year. So you're following it to a T. Good job.
I like that idea. I really do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One year, about 3 years ago now, my theme was the Bible, and I actually back then it was a New Year's resolution, but I read the Bible cover to cover.
Nice.
It's an interesting read, and so valuable when you're talking to somebody who says you need to read the Bible, and you go, yeah, I read it cover to cover. Did you? And they go.
Yeah, I feel like if I ever want to, like, I know sometimes they say, oh, you don't need to read it, and I'm just like, yeah, but I feel like it'd be good if I was like, yeah, I know on this page it says X, and on this page it talks about this, and I know the wording, as opposed to trying to like, regurgitate whatever it is someone on the atheist experience said.
If you're ever going to like put in the effort to read the Bible cover to cover, it's a big book, right? Mm-hmm. And it's an archaic book. It's tough read. If you're ever going to do that, having done it, my recommendation would be choose very carefully the translation you're going to read. Like really make a intentional choice of which translation you want to read and why you're choosing that translation. And then secondly, keep a journal as you read, like because it's a big book. It's a long read.
So my intention at some point is to have a show, and part of that show will include like reading parts of the Bible and kind of going over it and doing kind of like deep discussions into what parts, because like there are probably some parts of the Bible that aren't terrible, so you can read like, okay, actually this value that it espouses is not too bad, so we can keep this part, and other parts you're like, oh, this is an interesting story, like this kind of weird parable, or like this doesn't make any sense, like I'm assuming Genesis is just going to be like, this makes no sense whatsoever. Like if you follow science, it's not correct. I mean, if it's a story or a metaphor, then like I don't know what it's a metaphor for, except for this is how the earth was not created. Like, but that's my intention to do at one point, is to read the Bible cover to cover.
Fun thing about Genesis is learning that like 95% of the Old Testament Bible stories that you're aware of are from Genesis. Not a lot happens in the rest of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's a dull read.
And one thing I'm hoping to find is try to find a site. I'm sure there's one out there that like compares the language of all the different Bibles, so that like you just see them side by side. Because I just have like a free one that was from like Kindle, and it's like the New English version or something. It's like one I haven't heard about a lot, and it'd be great if I had like a Bible like side by side and be like, okay, and this one, pretty much all of them say the same thing, and there's no real difference. So I don't need to, if someone says, oh, you only read this Bible, you need to read this other one. I'm like, well, I read that one and also all the other ones side by side.
Yeah, you're already doing it wrong. You're supposed to read King James.
That's
what, always
that's
King James.
Like. Yeah. Well, again, I'll try to find that. I don't want to go and buy a Bible and support the mission.
But
why is
God's
King
not
James,
hiding? God's not hiding. It's a lot of
why
work.
is the King James like the go-to? Like this is the only acceptable version of it.
Well, the one I have is apparently the most literal version, so that's actually probably the one that's closest to what the original text was. Allegedly, I don't know, but
yeah, I think that's what I was told too. Yeah. And they made like a huge emphasis on like, because especially in Sunday school when I used to do that, like our Sunday school study book, their scriptures did a different translation. I think it was NIV, just so it's like, I think NIV is like the easiest one that's, uses modern words so you understand it. And that's what I read too, so I can freaking understand what the hell they're talking about. But then my facilitator would find the scripture that they're like referencing and then pull out his Bible, which was the King James version. And then he'll be like, okay, I'm going to read this scripture, but I'm going to pull out my Bible and I'm using the King James version. And I'm like, you say that every time. We know. So they just made it a big emphasis because it like Raspurrtin was saying, it's apparently the closest really translation to the original or whatever.
Well, the one I have is the,
from my understanding,
standard version or something is what mine is. ESV. I don't know. I've never heard of that one, so that one's probably the less popular of all.
I've heard of that one,
but
I'm no biblical scholar. But my understanding is like the King James is just about the worst translation you could hope to find. Like the least scholarly version, because first of all, it's super old as far as an English translation, right? We've like learned more since then. It's a weird choice from a scholarly, and again, I'm not a scholar, but from my understanding, it's a weird choice to go, this is when God chose to give people the right translation of whatever the hell he was talking about.
It's not only that, but just understanding what the words say. It's basically you're combining Shakespeare speech with religion. It's like, oh my God, just.
Well, it makes it more compelling and more interesting, right? It's like when how for some reason to Americans like a British or European accent is like it makes you want to listen to it more, right?
So classy.
It feels more authoritative.
Yeah.
It says thee and thou, and that sounds more hoity-toity.
It's more proper. So it's more has more authority.
It's amazing. And I actually called out back to the Mormon days. I called out the Mormons who visited me, and because they were talking about the King James, and I said, you can tell like it's a more respectful way to refer to God, to say thee and thou instead of you to God. Did I tell the story already?
Not this
maybe.
Already.
I don't know.
So you have a lot of more about the Mormons.
Yeah, I know.
I don't think you told us about the Bible.
I'm gonna let you shill your story, and then we're gonna move on.
So here's my story.
Share your story.
I said, like thee and thou, just it's a more formal way of speaking. It's an old-fashioned formal way of speaking, where now we would just say you in like an informal sense. And so talk to God, thee, thou. And they're like, yeah, it's just more formal. Whenever we pray to God, we say thee and thou. It's more formal. But it turns out it's not. It's completely informal. Like if you know Spanish, you know that in Spanish there's a formal and informal version of you. What is it? What is it in Spanish? Usted versus tú and usted?
Both vosotros.
Yeah. So in English, there used to be a formal and informal version of you, of the second person pronoun. And the informal was the thee, thou version of it. That was the informal version. That's how you'd talk to your child. But in English, the informal version slowly over time got so informal that it became downright insulting to use it. And if you've ever learned or taken high school Spanish, you've heard that there's a danger in using the tú version versus usted in the wrong situation, because it could be insulting to somebody. Call a police officer tú, he's not going to be happy with you.
No.
But the same thing happened in English. And so in English, we dropped the informal version because it was downright insulting. And now it's this archaic thing we have that only persists in places like the King James Bible. But for us as 21st century people, because it only exists in places like the King James Bible, wow, it sounds all old-fashioned and informal, even though it's the informal version of the people.
I thought we liked
stupidity.
old-fashioned and informal. Well, anyway, that's another day. I let you shield. Thank you for kicking off.
To add to his show a little bit. Apparently, my phone is also like biased towards like fancy words. Anytime I tried to put in the, like THE, it always does thy. So I'm constantly saying like, like, can you tell me where thy car is, or where thy like whatever is, or I was listening to thy podcast the other day. Like, I just let it go, and I'm like, they know what
Why
that
does
means.
it automatically defer to that?
I do swipe, so it's like you have to drag your finger across the keyboard.
Oh,
and I guess,
yeah.
But you have to you have to train the phone to do that, right?
Right, exactly.
I guess like me and my partner were like doing thys and thous one time as like a joke, and it just kind of was like, oh, you want to do this all the time now? And I'm like, I just
All
let
right.
it happen. So I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm just really fancy sometimes when I write.
My phones. Wow, that's funny.
Mhm.
Well, anyway,
Mhm.
thank you for that opener, but it's lecture time.
Uh-oh. Damn.
Yay! It's not
Alright.
just purely lecture, but it's more of a discussion. Thank you, Raspurrtin, for bringing this topic to us today. So, without further ado, you have the floor.
All right, there will be a quiz at the end and an essay, so everyone take
All right, that's the show.
All right.
Go for it.
So in the last IFWAS, I think I had briefly mentioned that I was watching this like rationality class that was being done at Harvard by
Mhm.
Steven Pinker, who's like a big free thought skeptic professor. And one of the lectures he had involved a professor named Erica Chenoweth. And she talked about kind of, she compared like the success rates of nonviolent protest or nonviolent resistance versus violent resistance, and kind of did like a lecture and an informal discussion on that. And as I was watching it, I was kind of like, thoughts of like, the Black Lives Matter movement and like, the rioting that's happening, either in connection with it or they are connected with it anyway. And just, why does it seem like we're not moving forward? But also looking back at things like the Arab Spring, where like these entire governments were taken down, without there being a militarized uprising. So I was just interested in kind of looking at that. And I guess I'll just share the slides. So I totally just stole these slides from her lecture. I don't think she'll mind. And if they do, they can sue me.
Oh, that's perfect. We won't have this channel anymore.
It's a discussion. So we're discussing it, and it's okay.
That's cool. All right. So
Raspurrtin has declared that it is okay.
I'm a lawyer. It's fine.
But, there you go. See, we got a lawyer.
Wow.
Yep. I'm a lawyer. It's fine. But I'm just going to leave it like this so that it's easier for me to work on. So, you'll see in the side here is their people. But so like an interesting thing was they showed this graph here that was like showing how many different types of uprisings had happened throughout the last century or so, and like the red ones on the right are the more violent ones, and then the orange ones are the non-violent ones, and just seeing how they kind of increased over.
Wow.
So there was a lot more violent ones, way in the earlier 1900, 1910, and then each decade, the violent ones increased a little bit, but then suddenly they flip-flop, and there's suddenly a whole bunch of more non-violent ones, where especially in the 2010 range was like, that was pretty much Arab Spring, time, and there's just tons of other ones throughout the country. And then she also showed this graph too that showed kind of the success rate of those uprisings. And it's interesting that you see the yellow part of it, while it still has some dips and such, up here kind of really goes up to 50%, and it goes all the way up to like, the 60-70%, and then it just plummets as it goes into like this new century, whereas the violent ones kind of fluctuate, but they also tend to go down, but they never had as much of a high success rate really, except for this part right here.
So quick pause, because I'm sure you're probably going to explain this. What and I've noticed this on both the graphs. There's like a very big significance in like the early 1990s. Did they explain like why?
So are you saying like how it changed, really shot up here and kind of went there? I mean, it's just the types of, because I know the Arab Spring was in the like 2010, 2019, or like before that. I don't think they went into exactly what happened here, because they didn't go into detail on every single uprising that was talked about in each of those.
So
I'm afraid of.
The first graph was like the number of uprisings.
Yes.
Like, so this is total number of uprisings, which we can see is on the increase.
Yep.
But then the second graph, which is the percentage success, if I read this correctly.
Yep.
And that's where we see that spike sometime around late 90s, early 2000s.
So this is the success rate of it. So
right. So it's not an increase in the number, it's an increase in success. And that's what I find interesting, is this precipitous drop in success rate.
Yeah, and that's what she goes into, and that's kind of like, because some of the more famous like uprisings and resistance that they talk about is like, as you see kind of in the background here, might be hard to see, but it's Gandhi, and then she also talks about like, the civil rights movement in the 60s, and that probably falls in this area right here. So, but yeah, again, so it's like it kind of shows that violent uprisings do work, but at a much lower rate than nonviolent ones, and nonviolent ones, aren't perfect, but they have a much better rate than violent. But then it shows, there was a sharp decline in violent ones succeeding, but then there is a much higher rate of nonviolent, but then that too has since gone down. And so she said that there are like these 4 principles of like what makes a nonviolent resistance successful. And it's building large, diverse participation and sustaining momentum, eliciting loyalty shifts among pillars of support, maintaining discipline despite escalation of repression, and then using a variety of nonviolent methods. So one thing I kind of read that is that I can kind of see how some of these aspects don't seem to have translated to some of the more recent like movements, like the Black Lives Matter movement, and some of the like left leaning or more progressive movements. And I'm wondering, and that's where I kind of saw that. I was like, oh, I see why some of these might be having trouble getting off the ground. And one thing that was, I'll go back, I guess, to these and kind of talk about more. But this next graph, this shows the probability of success of the movement versus how many people you have sustained in the movement. There was another graph, but I might have been cut off or something, but it showed that like I think it's later on. Okay, yeah, so it's later on, but it was saying that in order for the movement to be successful, it has to follow that first pillar where it has momentum and it has a good chunk of the population. And then she has this formula, same thing, total participants per day times the total number of events in a prior week. And then she shows this graph that shows, the percentage of the population that is involved in it, and then the number of events per week. So this is for specifically Africa, but I think it would translate to other ones. So I guess not the issue I had, but what I kind of noticed was like, this 5% of the population, I'm not sure how some of the how large some of the like movements we have nowadays are with mobilizing this many people for one cause, and also are they able to have a number of concerted events in 1 week that could sustain and push these events forward. Like, I know we're not going to be able to learn about every single Black Lives Matter movement or every single like progressive march or something, but it's kind of that idea where, when there was an uprising in, wherever, that was kind of like what you heard about every single day. And they had that kind of that one idea was to try and, fix the, or try to, overthrow the government. Or for the civil rights movement, it was, the whole point was to increase the betterment of Black individuals in America. And they were able
down
to
disenfranchisement.
And I think those like singular widespread ideas is what sustain this, because 5% of the population doesn't seem like a lot, but you need to sustain that with numerous events over the week. Like, again, the highest rank was like hundreds of events per week, 5% of the population being involved in that.
So events, that means, nonviolent protests, that means demonstrations, that means going to your local capital and holding a town hall. Like, are the events varying, or are they very specific?
Yeah, so I think that's something else that we'll go over a bit later. Is also same thing, is that it's using diverse tactics. Because if all you do is show up every single, I think the one thing is that these resistance movements are more for like repressive or violent regimes that are trying to stop the whatever from happening. So you could argue that like the Black Lives Matter movement might be facing that because of the way that police react to their protests sometimes. But it becomes a point where it's like, all right, if all you do is you show up here, you do the same thing over and over again, they're going to know how to stop you. They're going to know how to deal with it. So you do have to have like a diverse series of tactics, which is shown like later on in this these slides or whatever. So I just thought this was interesting how they actually kind of graphed out and were able to figure out sort of a formula for like how much percent of the population you need versus how many events you need to have to show that like exponential growth. Because like look at the difference between barely 5% with 60 events, and then suddenly it shoots up to like 80, this large
with double the events a week.
Yeah, pretty much doubles the probability of the leader. Again, I guess it's very specific in this case that it's about leader exit in Africa, but I'm sure it like can be applied to other forms of movements as well. And then of course there's the one of the ideas is that when the more women you have involved, the more likely of success. And the reason they have that kind of ties in with the idea of having a diverse like range of participation. And because if it's a violent movement, it's more likely going to be younger men who are involved in it, because they're more likely to be willing to fight and be rowdy and shoot at people. But if you have a large coalition of nonviolent people, you're going to have way more people who can get involved, like people who are disabled or people who are women or even sometimes children. They're not going to be worried about, oh, do I have to pick up a gun and shoot at people, or do I have to go mob a store or something in order to support this. And sorry, go ahead.
I forgot what I was really going to say, but it just occurred to me that a lot of the no, I'll think about it. I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead.
In the U.S., the power of a movement like this is also about resonance with the outside viewership of your movement. So having women on the front lines is going to help you resonate with the other 50% of the voters.
Broader scope. Yeah.
And I guess the thing I see a lot with the the movements that are more like in the front and kind of the limelight now is like Black Lives Matter and like anybody who's basically a progressive and Antifa and stuff like that, is a lot of the issues I see here are kind of like related either intentionally or like they're either a part of the group dynamic or they're attributed to the group dynamic. And that's kind of an issue like that. That was why I think there's that steep decline is a part of that happening across all different types of nonviolent movements. Like, for example, I think this one is probably like really stark with some Black Lives Matter like rhetoric that is either spread by the actual movement or spread by people trying to disparage the movement. Is they do a really good job of kind of pitting Black Lives Matter versus the police, as opposed to trying to like integrate the police, which is a pillar that supports the people they're fighting against, which is the repressive government. But if you isolate them, they're like, no, we're going to keep supporting the people we are with because they're on our side versus these people who are against us. So I think
that was one of the core pushbacks, even from the beginning, from when they were kneeling in the NFL, was, oh, you're against the military.
Yeah.
Now you're basically against the military, and you're non-patriotic, and you're against all the positive things of the whole country, and all that stuff from the very beginning. Just when Kaepernick, kneeled one time, now they try to pit him against all of law enforcement and the military and anything patriotic. So that was like, even though they were totally unrelated,
right.
But that was a way to kind of dissolve the power of that protest.
Yeah, and again, I know a lot of the like anti-police rhetoric that's kind of pushed on, that's attributed to the Black Lives Matter movement is kind of not actually part of their movement, but there are instances where like I remember one time I was in law school and there was this like leftist or like very progressive, I say quote unquote because they kind of, I don't know how, they're more like agitative, like left-leaning people, but they were like talking to our class and they were like constantly calling cops pigs, and I'm like, I understand your like issue with what the cops do, but the more you call them that, the more they're not going to want to like have anything to do with you. And that's kind of where this pillar of support is. You need to get these pillars of support on your side. And like what the professor was saying is that it's not always like police, but sometimes it's like business owners, or it's people who help support the structure or the regime that you're trying to go against. But then it's like, if you isolate them and alienate them and just make them feel like they're not wanted or respected, then you're not going to get that support, and that kind of limits your efficacy as a group. And then so another interesting thing was that when it comes to there's like these 4 different types of acts that you can engage in as a nonviolent movement. One of them is dispersed act of omission. So it's like a bunch of people over across the county or whatever will not by a certain they have better examples, but like they have these ones: dispersed act of omission, dispersed act of commission, concentrated act of omission, and concentrated act of commission. And they have the risk factors that are involved in whether you're going to face repression from it. And then they have examples of dispersed methods. So commission is when you go out and do something. So you're like flash mobs, you stay at home, you overload administrative systems, you fake have fake protests, so it like messes with the system, and they all have to try and go out and stop these fake protests, but actually it's just using up their resources. And there's things like this where you stay at home or you do electricity. And then there's concentrated methods, which are this side over here is what we kind of see a lot, which is sit-ins, marches, demonstrations, and then occasionally we have these. But we see a lot of these, like these ones, which are the highest, which is the highest risk of being repressed. And this shows. So this is an interesting one where it shows the success rates of nonviolent campaigns that did not have any violent flanks attached to them versus nonviolent campaigns that had violent flanks, and then violent campaigns. And I think this one here, the nonviolent campaign with violent flanks, I think part of that is where Antifa kind of gets lumped in with BLM people, and there's also just like agitators who join any marches they do and makes them violent, where they kind of all get smushed together into one big lump, and that kind of affects how successful the campaign is.
It also changes the perception, because I think, I don't know how solid or how true this is, maybe Justin knows more than I do, but there were instances with Black Lives Matter protests and movements where, for the most part, the actual group didn't do anything to, pose any harm to anyone or destroy a business or anything like that, but it was aggravated by a person that happened to be in a crowd that's not a part of Black Lives Matter, but wants to purposefully destroy or cause a ruckus just to give a bad light to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Well,
that's part of that. I'll talk about a little bit more later on. What were you going to say, Justin?
Yeah, that's people undermining the movement, but then there's also people that just took advantage of the situation. I mean, so BLM is primarily a leftist movement, leftist ideas, but there's different versions of that, right? And there is a version where people just want to cause as much harm and damage to the system or the current structures as possible. So they will, their goal is almost always to inflict harm and damage where possible. And if they can do it under the cover of a peaceful protest, then they're going to take advantage of that situation.
Yeah, and then that was. Can I go to the next slide? Yeah. And so, yeah, this kind of shows what the graph before, where it just showed how we did really well in this section, and it suddenly had a kind of sharp decline down of being of how this actually shows how participation in nonviolent campaigns has kind of been on a decline, and so that kind of correlates with them losing momentum and not being able to extend. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a lot of people who are involved in the campaign. Like, there's probably a lot of people who identify as like supporting Black Lives Matter or supporting progressive ideals, but yeah, this just shows like. But then there's this issue with how repressive governments and whoever the opponent of the movement is able to mess with the thing. And that's what we were saying before, is how you can blame outsiders and foreigners. You're just like, oh, these are just random people who are showing up and they're not actually Americans. Or you can say, oh, they're all terrorists and traitors. And that's what is constantly being said about BLM people and Antifa people, being able to characterize them as terrorists and traitors to the American way. There's people who are showing up to mess with the messing with the nonviolent protest and like instigating them or inciting them so that they become violent, and then you can blame it on the the movement. And then there's these are just a bunch of the different ways that governments and movements are being repressed. It kind of just goes through different things. 1 second.
Hey, Malty. Good to see you.
Hello, Malty. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. I had a question and I lost my train of thought. Any input? Oh, did you remove your headset?
Yeah, it was dying and I don't know where the cable is. So I'll find it later.
Fail. Okay.
Hopefully it doesn't sound too bad.
No, you're fine.
Sounds fine.
Okay. But yeah, so another thing was like, because nowadays it seems like, oh, we have a lot of people who are able to join these movements because of things like the internet, and we're able to have mobilize these movements really well. But then, they talk about the downsides of it, and that, okay, it's easier for people to track you and figure out what you're doing. It's easy to get a lot of people. It doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to join for the long run, because, you see people all the time. That is also, there could be a giant protest of people, but everyone who supports the protest didn't show up, but they'll say they, will support it, or that they went there once for fun, and then they stopped going because it, involves having to leave their work or having to get involved more than they were willing. And also, I think this third one is also pretty important too, where it comes to there's more, I don't know if this is exactly what she meant, but there's a lot more superficial people who join the movement but don't actually get really involved with the, you know, there's lots of people who were doing the hashtag like Asian hate, but how many of them would, you know, be able, like many could be willing, but how many would actually go out and like do any of the civil disobedience that they had, either because they just don't have time because they have to work, or they don't think there's enough people in their area who would be involved in it, or it's hard because you might get arrested, you might have to deal with people messing with you, and people just don't want to do that.
Yeah. Now that those graphs, those earlier graphs where you see the nonviolent protest declines, it makes sense now in the early 200s, Jesus. It makes sense now why it has been such a decline, because with the uprise of the internet and increases in social media, you know, we have become more laxed and in our own like homes to just, okay, it's easy, like you just said, to do the hashtags and the tags and the tweets and all that stuff. It's easy to do that. And then, but to proactively go out demonstrating, protesting, fundraising, things like that, volunteering, whatever. It's no wonder that you do still see the activity, but it has not been as aggressive as it was, you know, in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, it's easier to feel like you're making an impact from your own home.
I made a difference. I posted it on Twitter.
Yeah, and it's also the idea of like, you know, like that graph we saw before where like you need like 5% of the population to do like 80 events a week or something. Like, you know, that I, you know, just thinking of how much effort and how much like involvement that would take is, you know, expansive. And thinking, you've maybe heard about some of the other uprisings that happened in like Arab Spring, and you're like, oh yeah, there were like, you know, constant you know, things that they were doing, and it was just like seemed like endless, and they had tons of people doing it. But then like, you know, in America, it sounds like there's maybe tons of things happening all the time. Like, you know, you heard about the Portland protests that were going on, but like, was that even enough people to, you know, mean anything? Like, it seemed like it was dwindling to a couple hundred, maybe some dozen after a while. So like that long-term engagement kind of ended. But also there's, you know, the optics of that were easy to mess with because of just, you know, yes, it's the police that were instigating, but it's not like every person who went was a perfect angel who didn't do anything. But that's what they hone in on, is those people who were perfect angels who weren't perfect angels, who were like throwing things back or like setting dumpsters on fire. And like, it's those optics that are not only the ones that they focus on, but also it gets spread a lot easier because of technology. Because like, you know, think about back in Gandhi's era and back in like MLK's era, you know, if there were some bad actors, like maybe some people would hear about it, like maybe there'd be rumors, but what you would see would be the marches and all the nonviolent stuff. But here it's like one person sees it, they put it on their Twitter, and it gets spread everywhere. Yeah. And everyone's like, oh, look at these like nasty BLM people who are trying to like destroy property and everything.
Yeah, it already. Oh, go ahead.
I would say any Twitter post from any random user can effectively have the same reach as, you know, yesteryear's front page news of the New York Times or something from 10 years ago.
Yeah, and so
you used to have to have like a nationally syndicated show or a national newspaper to spread that kind of message,
or a public access type thing.
Well, even public access usually wasn't national.
Oh, no, you're right.
Do you ever wonder how many things historically we know about because there happened to be some method of recording it when it happened, where today we're recording pretty much everything. I mean, well, there's a video camera pointed at everything that's going on.
There was a concerted effort to document specific events. You know, if an event was deemed worthy for historians or record keepers to make, you know, documents. Oh, a battle, a presidency, a declaration being signed, things like that.
Whereas
Yeah,
now
but-
my doorbell is recording everything that happens on the street in front of my house 24/7. And should
Yeah,
anything interesting happening on the street in front of my house, it will go into that archive, whatever that thing is.
Yeah, but so
But
we're
it's not
recording
yours,
things.
though.
So they
You don't
recorded
care.
things like battles, but now not only do we record the war, we record every individual interaction in that battle.
Yeah.
So when soldiers go off and kill a civilian, that's recorded and they get tried for it and thrown in jail. You know, 100 years ago, that probably nobody would have ever known about it, or you know, some time ago. And now it's every interaction is accounted for.
One thing that I like that we're able to do this is that we're able to leverage more specific groups. Like so the 7th and 9th district voting district in my area has banded together. There's a nonprofit called Seattle Undivided, excuse me, indivisible, undivided, whatever. And they are definitely trying to leverage this group of people and to push legislation, to talk to your, to get involved in government, to make a difference. And it's showing that it can be done. So.
I mean, that was one thing I was wondering, is that when they say, oh, you need like 5% of the population, I wonder if that needs to like be adjusted as it gets to like a smaller component. Like, you know, if you have a small town of like 1,000 people and you want to enact change, is 5% of the population enough, or do you need to have like slightly more because of how small it is? And like that could occur, you know, county, like if you're just trying to fix something in your county and it's not necessarily a national or state issue, then, you know, do you need to try to focus on getting 5% of the county? I like how there's kind of like a number attached, but it also needs to be 5% that's constantly doing events, constantly doing work to sustain that movement.
I would think that a smaller group, 1,000 people, so 50 people out of 1,000 would be a significant, you know, that are constantly active would be a significant amount of noise compared to the disbursement of responsibilities in the community that everybody else has to do. There's no other organized, concentrated events because there's so many other things that everyone else has to do. So 50 people focusing on the same thing, you know, multiple times a week would probably make a big impact. Or it would probably take less than that in a smaller community.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking when it comes to like, you know, these more recent movements. Is maybe I'm just not seeing the whole picture because of how it's being reported, but I just feel like it hasn't reached that point where it has a large enough coalition of the populace who is willing to do constant protest. Because like you kind of hear like, oh, when George Floyd happened, a bunch of protests happened. And then they kind of peter off, and then like another one happens. Okay, then the protests come back, but then they kind of peter off again. It's like, no, they have to be ongoing. They have to keep going, and you need to get a lot of people.
Well,
but then there's a lot of issues where, you know, the Blue Lives Matter was done in response to Black Lives Matter. So there's some sort of optics that make it like, you know, the Black Lives Matter is against the police, and you know, and it's against white people or something. So that kind of, yeah, I know people who are supportive of the idea know that, but it's kind of like the optics of it is easy to manipulate so that it makes it harder to find a diverse group that is also tackles pillars of support and is able to kind of sustain over time. Because it's like I don't feel like there's a large concerted effort of like 5% of the population who are constantly protesting. We usually hear it's kind of, and even I guess even then it would be more like, okay, you need if it's just in Baltimore or just in, you know, St. Louis or something, you would need, maybe you could just focus on 5% of the people in that city who's making the concerted, you know, effort for it. And I guess like it's, you know, it's interesting to see and just kind of read the concept of success that the one professor was talking about with like nonviolent movements, and how I see there's some issues with the ones that are happening now. So.
I don't know how these movements are successful. haven't read about them enough, but in Detroit, they had like well over like 100 days of every single day of marching, protests, events, everything. So they were very active for a long time, and they're still intermittent activity. But when you're talking about enacting national change on a national level, which is what they're trying to do, you're almost like, it feels like you're 100% reliant on the media, on the broadcast news networks, and to some extent social media to spread, get your message out there, because it's easy to stifle, what 5% of people are saying in favor of other things. And especially during, the BLM protests, Trump has dominated the news cycle for 5 years. And that was contrasting to, the protests. And so it was like almost like a media battle of who can get more clicks and more eyeballs on the screen of the protests, and their message and Trump's response to it. That they like, it was, I mean, obviously it was already there, but they built up a media culture war. That it wasn't even about the message anymore. It was just about the interaction between the two sides.
Exactly. You're fueling the outrage. What is more outrageous over the other, right? So you have to look at, and that's why it comes both ways, I think. With Black Lives Matter utilizing the media to push their representation, to push their movement, to push what they are all about. Media can definitely do that. But then on the flip side, like we were just saying, it's almost like every 2 weeks, something new. Then we have to get more outrageous. And then, we have this president that's saying shit and tweeting and blah, 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 blah. That's even more outrageous. So now our focus is drive to this. And so on that end, that harms Black Lives Matter and any other movement that's trying to progress and make a solid change to things, because the media is like, it's clickbait. Like, we've all been just so wrapped into what's the most shocking and what's the most hilarious and what would get me the most tweets or views or things like that, to where we can't focus solidly on one issue and event that's sound, but we just, it's almost like, ooh, squirrel, got to focus on that now.
Yeah, well, I mean, another thing that kind of, there's the two other aspects of the nonviolent resistance that's been successful, and it's the maintaining of discipline. I feel like that sometimes, I feel like that sometimes is lacking, because you see that sometimes in these protests they get, one side gets violent. I know the kind of the tendency is to get violent against them to defend yourself, but then that makes it much easier to see, like, look how violent these groups are and look how much they're, causing trouble. And I know, like, the actual thing that happened is they're just trying to defend themselves, but that optics is kind of what messes with it. And then I think it's also the idea of thinking of it long term, and how you have to go, you have to work long term. And a lot of these movements, it seems that they want change right now, and if it's not changing right now, we're just going to keep doing the same thing, and we're going to keep, doing it, but we want the change now, as opposed to, like, looking long term, which is what they said was a big success for, like, the civil rights movement, was that they strategized and really thought, like, all right, where are we aiming? What can we do to get to that aim? And I think they understood that it's not going to happen, like, immediately. Like, didn't, like, the bus boycott take, like, a year or something to do, for it to succeed?
The bus.
It took a long time.
It took a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk, which I literally ripped off another person.
I like it.
They explained it a lot better than I did, but I'm just the carbon copy of them.
No, appreciate it. Thank you.
There we go.
Said, something, Multi?
No, just standing on the shoulders of giants. That's what we're all doing, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I recommend watching the rationality class, because in the beginning he kind of teaches you just, like, the foundations of rationality, like how we come to different different ways of thinking, and then the later lectures, which are the ones that kind of kicked in as the pandemic kicked in, are more topic based. Like, they had someone who talked about effective altruism, and then climate change, medicine, crime. You know, a lot more topical things. And it's just interesting seeing the person's research on that. So highly recommend.
Is it no, you said there was more, right? More to the lectures? Like there were multiple, or it was just that one?
I was just doing that one for tonight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying that those other lectures are there and they're interesting to read and or not read but watch. And I mean, all of the people who popped in were all of the guest lecturers have like books, and a lot of them seemed really interesting to look into. Yeah, so thank you again for coming to my TED Talk.
You got a link to that to their website or their YouTube channel in the.
Yeah, it's an official. I don't know if I can put it anywhere because I don't know if the chat will let me.
I got that. I kind of came in late, so I didn't catch your very start. So
yeah, I'll put it in our chat.
That's okay.
It's an actual class from Harvard. So it's run by Steven Pinker, who's like a big free thought, free thinker person. So he does a lot of like rationality.
Steven Pinker, I've heard of him. How did I miss that name in the beginning? Should have perked right up.
But yeah. So yeah, I don't remember how I think I was listening to something from like FFRF and they mentioned him and he mentioned he had a class. So I went on it because it's for free. Like you can watch the lectures for free and they have the syllabus. So if you want to read the extra articles and stuff, they have those. They name them. I don't know how available they are to like the general public, but you know, they have them and there's some books that I really will probably want to look into getting them at some point. But yeah, can highly recommend.
I've read a few of his books, and they're wonderful. And I've seen a couple of his talks on YouTube, and he's delightful to listen to. He's a very likable guy.
Yeah, seems very fun.
Is he?
He plays.
He's a nerd. He's a complete nerd, and that draws me to him.
At the beginning of each of his lectures, he plays music that ties in with the lecture somehow.
Yep. He's a nerd.
So he somehow found rationality-based musics or songs.
Nice. Well, I hope that. Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to tell a boring story. He's got this wonderful book called The Language Instinct, which tells a story about the evolution of humanity and how language in humans is instinctual. And he makes a really strong argument for it. And whether you wind up agreeing or not doesn't matter, but it's a really, really interesting argument. And just what you learn through the argument he's making is, read the book. It's one of the best books, The Language Instinct by Steven Pinker. It's the best book I've read. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, I'm a nerd too, turns out.
Are you?
Yeah, I mean, so I have an idea for a show/podcast I want to do, and one of them is reading like a nonfiction like thought book, not specifically like a free thought book, but like, you know, just general books that are about kind of like how the world works, and doing like a one book a week review of them, and just be like, this is what this person says about this, and let's discuss it. So
wow, 1 book a week.
Not that bad.
Maybe that's just me. Or unless it's a 60+ hour audiobook.
Yes.
I don't know what you're talking about. I finished a 60-hour audiobook since the last show.
He was on it. What was it about? Can you give us a book report?
Oh no, it was just a high fantasy trilogy. It was called Paternus, Battle of the Gods or something like that. And it was mostly, it mixed together a bunch of different mythologies, but it was very long.
It was very long. I'm glad you finished it.
So if you like mythology and high fantasy, or urban fantasy is what they categorized it as, but it was good.
I started reading a book this week.
Oh yeah?
I'm just on the introduction still, but
the third chimpanzee.
Jared Diamond.
I think I might have read it before, and so I'm trying to get far enough in to remember if I already read this book. But Yeah, Jared Diamond. It's evolution. Blah 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 blah. I'd like to read more. I just can't do it.
I mean,
Too many things going on to sit and read. Mostly the idiot kids.
That's why I do Audible.
I know. Yeah, I should.
have so many credits. I think I have
spend-
like 10.
I spend all my audio time listening to apologia videos over and over and over again. I don't know why. They just make me happy.
And listening to terrible discussions on Discord.
Yeah, sometimes. The great thing about the apologia videos is I don't have to interact. I can just listen and get my thing done. Where when I listen to people making bad arguments on Discord,
He's like, I'm safe.
I wind up getting distracted.
You don't need to do the work. Apologia would do it all for you.
Loving God wouldn't send me to hell. It's not something love is. I don't know how you think that's what love means. Yeah.
Well, there's this interesting argument that I think my friend who's actually a Muslim kind of put forward was that the way the universe is just like one theory is that the way the universe is, the idea with like hell is just how the universe is, and God knows that these rules are how it is, but he doesn't control them. That's just how the universe is. So it's like, well, he didn't create hell. That's just how it is, and that exists, and that's just what people have to deal with. Like the idea that God is, or Allah, I guess, was the ultimate. He knows the way to live life, and that like he's the ultimate. He has the ultimate knowledge of how to live life and how to get to heaven or how to get to hell, but he didn't actually create it. So he just knows. He's just saying like, this is the way to this is how you get to hell. That's just how it is. Like I have no control over it.
So it just gets them off the hook for creating this messed up system.
This is my objection, Justin, is if you think that's just how it is, I get it, right? You've been convinced that that's just how it is, and you accept that's just how it is. Now tell me that you think it sucks that's how it is because you're a human and you have compassion for other humans. And if you can't come to the point where you go, hey, this is what God is, but it turns out he's a bit of a dick. Like, then you're wrapped up. You've got your head up your Bible's ass, and you can't get it out.
I've tried that line. I've tried to walk people down that line of reasoning before, and got to. It just sounds like your God's a bit of a dick.
A cop out.
It did not improve the relationship between me and the person. To
that point, it's a long conversation. It's an end game. When I met my wife, she thought that God was going to torture me in hell forever.
Yeah.
Now she thinks he'll
Still
just
thinks that way.
annihilate me, which
it's worse.
as the person facing one of the two, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had a
dead.
vote, if I had a vote and it was a dichotomy, I'd vote for the annihilation. So, thanks. Yes.
Your wife is so loving.
What was the prince's name, or the king, the duke's name in The Princess Bride? Me or death, death or me.
Oh,
It was some weird name. I
Yeah.
know sort of.
I don't know what's that
The
nearest.
weird man.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and like the way he described his journey of trying to find answers is like someone tells you that there's a mountain you have to climb in order and when you get to the top you reach enlightenment. And I was just like, but how do you know the mountain actually exists and that it's not an illusion? And like I wasn't sure exactly I don't remember exactly what his answer was because that was like a couple years ago. But it was like he didn't give a very good answer for like, well, what if you're wasting all your time trying to find this mountain and it was never there in the first place?
Well, Dr. King found it. He saw the promised land. That's what he said in
did.
his speech.
He did. Was that a metaphorical seeing, or I hope it was not a metaphorical promised land.
I don't know where it is.
I have a question to ask, but I feel like I want to let you guys wrap this up, and we'll go to an after show, and I can ask my question because I don't.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
Move forward.
like how you segued. Thank you for the segue, Gegla. Yes, I guess we're gonna wrap up the show. Thank you,
Woo.
Raspurrtin, for that lecture. You have officially earned yourself a little
Own
segment
banner.
on the show. Yeah,
Oh,
and a banner.
Wait, do I have to come back and keep doing lectures each time
Yes,
now?
you do.
Damn it.
Unless you want to do
I'm just
something
gonna
else.
steal. I'm just gonna steal every single one of the lectures from the Rationality show. You'll never
and-
have to watch it. I'll just say
They'll
it.
do that to you if you get. They tried to wrangle me into a spot myself. I don't know if I got one yet.
Your segment is like 2 seconds long, and all you have to do is say anything about something. But
Say it.
I have to. Mine is like a 30.
Say it.
Mine was like
Say
an
the thing.
hour of talking.
Yes, give us your 2 seconds, Multi. Go.
All right, Malty, teach us something. Go.
I'll teach you something. Okay, hold on. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a very, if you worked on a car, especially if you worked on a car in a garage, that's why I have the practical guide for the analysis of blood from Myers. This is a 1908 or 1926 edition.
Can you analyze my blood?
Yeah, it's very easy. All you do is you just just for carbon monoxide poisoning.
Man, there's way more money in looking for traces of Jesus. Let me tell you. You start a religion.
Wait, what? You got Jesus in your blood?
That's cash.
So
I don't know. That's why he's got to analyze it.
Funny story.
No wonder.
Funny story. I've told it before, but I'll tell it again.
Tell it.
I got a referral to a surgeon just for a consultation. Had something, just minor surgery. Never actually went through it, but in the consultation, the doctor was saying, now after this, during the recuperation, the first time that you say you relieve yourself, you go to the bathroom, you may people say that the pain was so bad that they saw God. And I looked at her and I said, well, I happen to be an atheist YouTuber, so this is something that very much interests me. Can I quote you? Oh, she broke out laughing in the most uncomfortable way.
I know that laugh.
Of just like, no, you can't. Just like, but I'm really interested. Dr. So-and-so says that her patients report seeing God after surgery. So anyway, just anecdotal. But I can look, but there are definitely changes that happen to blood in carbon monoxide poisoning, and you can see it. It's something that has been known for hundreds of years, at least 100.
So, I mean, you can with the naked eye, you can see it, or you need a
Microscope.
You can smell it.
Spectrophotometer, you're looking at absorption lines.
You can taste it.
I bet you could. But you know how when you do a smoke, when you smoke some meat, where you get that pink line on the crust?
Oh yeah, no.
That's from carbon monoxide.
All
I've
right.
never smoked meat. I'm sorry.
As a rebuttal, starting next week, I want to have my Giggler Spouts nonsense segment.
Oh, that's
those banners
banners here.
Everyone gets their own segment.
I don't even need a fucking banner for that.
Wait, that wasn't the whole show?
He's talking again.
That wasn't the whole show. All right, folks. Giggler, whatever question that is, save it. We're going to go to the after show at the Discord. Okay, folks. Thank you again, Raspurrtin, for that little lecture of ours. Again, folks, go ahead. If you're not in the Discord, join us. We'll be there in just a few minutes. tiny.cc/IFDC. Of course, you can find Justin on Facebook and Twitter. And you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Oh my God, I'm there too. And Multi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm on the ACD. I'm on the nonprofits about every third week or so. Yep, that's about it.
Yeah, you
No
recorded.
Facebook. I did. Yep.
You did.
So that will
Yes.
be, yeah. We'll that'll be this upcoming Sunday, and probably record here. I don't know if I'm gonna. I'm trying to get a week off, but I don't know if I get a week off or not. We'll find out.
I don't know. We'll see. Probably not. Giggler, where can people find you?
I'll be rewatching this on YouTube and feeling shame. So see me in the comments.
Okay.
I will be there.
It's mostly me talking, so you'll just be like, "Damn, like what
I'll just
what happened?"
mostly being commenting ashamed of myself. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And Jena, you were you had an episode Nonprofits that aired last Sunday.
I did. Check that out.
So go watch that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. I have such a good partner.
So supportive.
Don't shake your head at me. Anyways, as Ollie Man says, please smoke more weed. Ollie Man, stop smoking so much weed. Oh my God. All right. We'll see you in the Control Z in the hizzy. Jesus. All right, guys. See you in the Discord.